Welcome back to Small Trees. I saw a comment recently asking me how to take cuttings properly. The tree you see here was worked in one of my earlier videos in January. It's grown a lot since then, and I need to force it to choose a leader to grow upwards. I'll use these cuttings as well as some from other trees to show you from start to finish how to properly take a cutting. In this background footage, I'm trying to both reduce the number of upward growing branches to force the tree into growing a dominant leader, as well as allow sunlight to the lower parts of the trunk, since I will be chopping this tree lower to begin to build taper next year. To the subject at hand, there are three types of cuttings to consider. There are new growth cuttings, semi-ripe cuttings, and then hardwood cuttings. New growth cuttings are usually taken in the spring. This is the terminal part of a branch that has not yet started to grow bark and become rigid. This sort of cutting is more commonly used on herbs, perennials, and things like that. When we're talking about bonsai or trees in general, new growth cuttings usually don't work very well. This is because the new growth does not have enough nutrients stored in it to feed it until it can grow on its own roots. Semi-lignified cuttings and hardwood cuttings are more suited for trees. Semi-lignified cuttings are taken in the summer when the new growth has just started to form bark. These can be taken from anywhere on the tree from the top to the bottom. Hardwood cuttings are usually taken in late winter or early spring before buds have opened. These are fully lignified small branches. They have the most nutrients stored in them out of the three types that we're talking about. You'll also often have many candidates for hardwood cuttings when you're doing your spring trimming. Here's an example of each type of cutting. New growth is easy to spot and is very fragile. This does not quite qualify as a semi-lignified cutting, but you can see the small brown spots on the branch. These are the very beginnings of bark formation. Lignified or hardwood cuttings are usually last year's growth. They have fully formed bark and are much more rigid than new growth. Here's a side-by-side comparison. New growth cuttings, what I trimmed off the tree earlier, usually fail to root, so I won't even use these. A good length to shoot for on a semi-lignified cutting is 4 to 6 inches, or roughly 10 to 15 centimeters. Trim any leaves present on the lower part of the cutting and try to leave only 2 to 3 leaves near the apex. Cut the bottom to the closest node. This is where the roots will form. Once you've made the cut, try not to touch it with your fingers. You want to keep this area as sterile as possible. Keys to successful cuttings lie in soil and air humidity, as well as a sterile, well-draining, and well-aerated soil. Pure perlite works very well for this purpose, but you can experiment with your own mixes to see what works best for you. I'm using turfus mixed with garden soil. If you wish to apply rooting hormone, do so now. Some people use it for everything, while other people say that too much could harm the cutting. I personally use it with a very good success rate. Don't press the cutting straight into the soil. Instead, use a chopstick to make a hole first. This keeps the rooting powder from rubbing off. Gently press the soil around the cutting to make sure that the cutting does not move. It's imperative that it remains stationary, or else newly formed roots could just break off. A good general rule for hardwood cuttings is to maintain an average length of 3 to 4 nodes. Remove any leaves at the bottom of the cutting and reduce the remaining leaves as well. An alternate way of reducing leaves is to fold each leaf in half and cut the top half off using scissors. This can also be used when defoliating a tree or if you're trying to allow sunlight into the inner branches. In Andrea Marigioli's book, Bonsai Maples, it's advised to make a 45-degree cut just below a node on hardwood cuttings. You then apply rooting hormone and put these cuttings in the soil at a 45-degree angle so that the cut you just made is parallel to the soil surface. This is supposed to stimulate rooting. Like before, use a chopstick to make a hole for the cutting before putting it in the soil. Lightly tamp the surface to make sure the cutting is secure. A systemic fungicide like daconil can now be applied if so desired. Place the cuttings in a shaded area that's well protected from wind. I'd advise building a mini greenhouse with a heating pad like I did a few videos ago, but for these, I'll just place them under one of my benches. I hope this answered any questions you had about cuttings. As always, if you have any questions you'd like me to answer, comment below and I'll see what I can do. Thank you for watching. Until next time.